Hi. Today I will be discussing David Rosen's article titled A Tale of Five Cities, The Peregrinations of Somma's and Verdi's Gustavo III, and Una Vendetta in Domino, and Un Ballo in Maschera, at the hands of the Neapolitan and Roman censorship. This article is a historical account of, as David Rosen writes, Verdi's and Somma's struggles with the Neapolitan and Roman censors leading up to the premiere of the work. Since the opera went through four major changes, resulting in five different settings of the opera, Rosen's title is A Tale of Five Cities, or really, A Tale of Five Settings. The first version, titled Gustavo III, was started by Verdi and Somma in 1857 and was to be premiered at the Carnival of 1857 to 1858. It was set in Stockholm, Sweden in the March of 1792, and it was based on a libretto by Scribe, which was mentioned by Philip Gossett as an example of French librettos becoming more popular, or as he put it, a rich vein to be mined during Verdi's time. This version was intended for the Teatro San Carlo in Naples and was ultimately rejected by the Neapolitan censors. The Neapolitan censors had 7 requirements that included some of the following. They wanted to change the king to a duke. They wanted it to be set in a Celtic region to justify the use and belief of witchcraft. Gustavo quickly turned into Una Vendetta in Domino, set in the late 17th century Pomerania. King Gustavo was changed to Duke Gustavo, and other changes were made in order to try to satisfy the censors. The censors rejected Una Vendetta, however, and added 6 more requirements. These can be seen in Table 2, numbers 8 to 13. They included major changes such as changing the wife to a sister. I'd like you to have a listen to this dramatic moment as Emilia reveals who she is to the conspirators. I think it would be a little less dramatic if she was Renato's sister, rather than his wife.
Io per altro il volto almeno questi non un passo sedosate traggo il ferro e lanciate con riteno sulle ciao auditori offrirlo
Here. The censors also hired their own librettist in order to provide their own version of the story, which was titled Adelia degli Adimari. Since Verdi had already written much of the music for Una Vendetta in Domino, a reviser was used in order to change lines and words that the censors had objected to. Since there were new objections to the libretto, the reviser had to make major changes, which Verdi obviously thought were appalling. Since changing Emilia from being Renato's wife to being his sister, and other major changes would certainly ruin the plot of the story, it was clear to Verdi that he had to look elsewhere in order to get this show premiered. In a letter to Vincenzo Lucardi, Verdi explained that he wanted to show the Neapolitan censorship that his libretto would even be approved by Roman censorship, who Rosen mentioned earlier were regarded as the strictest censors in Italy. So it seemed that Rome is where the opera would be premiered. The libretto that Verdi showed the Roman censorship was not Una Vendetta in Domino, but actually Gustavo III. The censors created their own libretto called Il Conte di Gothenburg. Eventually they settled on the name Un Ballo in Maschera, and the Roman censors still had objections with the drawing of lots and with some other things. As Verdi began threatening to take his opera elsewhere, the censorship gave in to a lot of these demands and allowed Verdi to keep almost all of the original plot and character elements. The Romans had insisted that the opera be somewhere else, however. preferably America. They also made sure that the killing of Ricardo would be referred to as murder, not assassination, as to not insinuate Ricardo's high political or social status. The gallows still posed a problem, as they were seen as too graphic to be on stage. Soma not only complied with these changes, but also took the opportunity of revision to add some of his own elements of local color. He added references to America and the New World, and this was a great example of, as Vasely wrote, the poet substituting words that were even more poetic and appropriate. Rosen fit most of the censor's objections into 4 categories. These are religious, political, moral, and a desire to avoid excessive violence. Politically, obviously regicide was a problem, so it was important to lower the political status of Ricardo. It was also important to make him likable and morally sound because of his higher status. Also, the word populo, the Italian word for people, was rejected by both Neapolitan and Roman censors. Populo must have had a political overtone at the time, because in example 1, one can clearly see that the word popolo is changed in both versions. The political censorships were clearly very interesting for this opera, and the censors obviously had a very specific sense of what would be politically charged and what wouldn't be, specific to the time. Religious concerns were a little more straightforward and included the use of witchcraft and references to God, like Iddio and Angelico. Adultery was the main moral problem. As a result, it was almost not allowed for Emilia to say, "I love you," back to Ricardo, because it would have been much too scandalous. Verdi was obviously furious about this. The censors also wanted a reason for Emilia to love Ricardo, like he had saved her father's life, or something like that. Problems of excessive violence arose with mentions of blood, sharpened daggers, and most importantly, the gallows. Rosen then gives us some more examples of Somma's changes in the libretto, and offers some insight into why he made the changes. Some were required by the censors, while others were his own choice in order to add color and convey the setting. Rosen leaves us with an interesting idea. He asks the reader to ask themselves what they think the censorship really did to change the story. Throughout the article, he referenced places in the libretto that may have been originally objected to by the censors, but were ultimately replaced by Somma with more creative text than the original. Rosen wonders, were these creative changes in order to add tone, setting, and local color ultimately beneficial or detrimental to the final product? Rosen made it clear that any attempt to set this opera in Sweden, as it was originally intended in Gustavo III, would be a mistake. He argued that since the music for Gustavo III was never actually completed, because it already formed into Vendetta in Domino, Verdi never actually composed an opera in Sweden. I object to this idea. Although he may have never technically composed an opera in Sweden, firstly, Rosen himself raised the question of whether the local color and language referring to the setting of Boston were constructive or destructive to the show. Secondly, in the article, the letter from Vasely to Verdi made it seem like Verdi was unhappy to have to settle for Boston. He would have preferred the Caucasus regions, which would have resembled Scribe's libretto a little more closely. Also, Vasely convinced him that it would work in Boston because everybody would know that he was actually talking about Gustav III. So if he wanted to talk about Gustav III, would it be such a bad thing to change it? Rosen thinks it would be. I think it would be fine. Also, Rosen earlier referred to the casting of lots as falling into the miscellaneous category of censorship. He could not fit it into religious, moral, or political reasons. I think that he had overlooked the religious connotations of the casting of lots. The casting of lots is referred to many times in the Old Testament of the Bible, as well as the New Testament, When the disciples have to pick a replacement for Judas, for instance, they casted lots. The casting of lots is seen to us today as a random choosing system, but to some Christians it wasn't seen as random, it was viewed as the voice of God. Therefore, having the casting of lots being associated with murder was probably not favorable with the church. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the article as much as I did. I thought it was extremely well written, and he was very informative and made some very great points. I will see you in class.